Hello everybody, welcome to the Political Vigilante. My name is Graham Elwood. Very special interview here with Joseph John from Veterans for Peace, who I met when Ron and I did the Progressive Comedy Tour in June. And he is in beautiful Asheville, North Carolina, at the block off Biltmore where we did the show. Joseph, how you doing today?
Doing great, Graham. Thanks for having me on the show.
So we talked a little bit when we first met back in June about everything that Veterans for Peace is doing, and I wanted to go into a little more detail about that and your own sort of personal experiences. So why don't you tell us what Veterans for Peace is and how people can get involved and what its main primary focus is?
Veterans for Peace is an organization primary goal of which is to educate our fellow citizens about the true costs of war. And this is done in many different ways. The local chapter here in Asheville holds a weekly peace vigil every single week, rain or shine, since the beginning of the Iraq War. You know, people try to get into schools to talk to the students there. Our holiday parade, the local contingent will march in the holiday parade. So there are things being done. I think that there's a lot more that can and needs to be done, honestly.
So why don't you give us, you know, your history of joining the military, and then what made you decide to take this path?
Well, I joined the military as a 17-year-old, like many young people in this country, because I felt like it was my only option. That's where the sort of unofficial draft enters the conversation, you know? So there's no draft, but you know, the powers, they rig the economy, they keep wages low, they keep education unfunded, so that people often come into adulthood and feel like they don't have any option. And the military starts to look like a really appealing choice. Suddenly overnight, you can have a salary, a roof over your head, 3 hots and a cot, 3 meals, and a place to sleep is the promise, right? Sounds good if you're, you know, in poverty, which many Americans are. So I sort of fell into that boat, and it seemed like a way out of town. I went with 10th Mountain Division to Iraq for a year, to Baghdad. And even that experience wasn't really enough to open my eyes. I was in the military for 6.5 years, got out and went to college with the GI Bill. And it was during that college time that I really started to understand a little bit about what was really going on, which I attribute largely to Chelsea Manning and WikiLeaks for the Iraq war logs, which contain the sort of infamous video called Collateral Murder, which shows American helicopters in Iraq killing civilians in the street. When I saw that, I remember that as being like the first major wake-up call for me, because it made me think, whoa, I was there in that city, and our helicopters were flying around while I was there, and what I was seeing in that video surely is not an isolated incident. Mm-hmm. And so it really sort of made me understand from that point what I had been a part of, and that's when the guilt and you know, starting to weigh my personal culpability in the many civilian deaths over there started to sort of become part of my cognizance.
Right.
And from there, you know, when you get to the end of a YouTube video, how all the related videos pop up, right? So then suddenly that one video led me to all these other videos of other veterans my age who had been to Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, winter soldiers, reminds us of the winter soldiers of the Vietnam era who came back and publicly were speaking about the tragedies that were happening, the injustices that the U.S. military was causing in the places where we're going because we're told by our government that we're going to go help the people there. So that really opened my eyes to what's really going on in American war zones. Mm-hmm. And it didn't take long before I stumbled upon Veterans for Peace. There was a local peace march happening in my college town, right outside my college town on Long Island. And that's where I met Professor Mac Bika, who is a Vietnam veteran, former Marine Corps captain, who is the head of the local chapter up there in Vietnam, in Long Island. Mm-hmm. And the rest is kind of history. I just became super passionate about the mission of educating people. Everybody needed to know. I felt like everybody needed to know what I had discovered, mm-hmm. which is that there's this thing called the military-industrial complex, which motivates the U.S. government to come up with these phony reasons why we need to be engaged in armed conflict with people around the world. And so it feels like my moral and civic duty to spread the word, to stop these wars, because there's innocent people who are continuing to die, including young, vulnerable, naive Americans, right, like I was.
Well, yeah, we just had another bombing or explosion or something like that in Afghanistan, which has not really been that covered. We've been in Afghanistan for 17 years. Mm-hmm. It's the longest war we've ever been a part of. We've spent somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 to $9 trillion on the global war on terror, and what have we stopped?
No end in sight. It won't end, and there's no end in sight.
Right.
It won't end unless we American citizens end it, like we did in the late 60s and early 70s. Mm-hmm. That was a successful anti-war movement.
Let me ask you this, because we talk a lot about this on this show, and I mean, I have some definite ideas, but I wanted to hear your input. Why do you think there's such a lack of an anti-war movement right now in America? Why people on the left seem to be in favor of, well, they want to go to war with Russia because they apparently hacked our election, or they want to, anyone that says, why are we in Syria, like Howard Dean calling Tulsi Gabbard an Assad apologist because she doesn't want another ridiculous regime change war. Mm-hmm. Where do you think this? Why is there such a lack of a conversation about an anti-war movement?
That's kind of a complex answer. Some thoughts that I have are there's a sophisticated system in place to prevent people from becoming educated about the American history of military imperialism and empire. We're told that all of these things, that all these wars that we have to go and fight are because somebody, somehow, somewhere poses an extreme threat to us. And it's just necessary for us to go and stop whomever somewhere. So this is repeated. I mean, the mainstream media especially is complicit in what Noam Chomsky calls manufacturing consent. And also people are busy working 2 jobs or 3 jobs to try to pay their bills. Right. And when they're not busy at their job, they have no shortage of culture, sports, you know, athletic culture, you know, who's Dancing with the Stars this week. You know, there's just so much to consume that it all is distracting. I mean, all of the shenanigans in the Trump administration with Stormy Daniels, and if it's not one thing, it's the next. As soon as the big story of the FBI investigation, the Mueller investigation, as soon as that started to kind of run dry, all of a sudden, you know, you got Stormy Daniels to pay attention to, and you know, this other scandal over here to pay attention to. A lot of distractions, a lot of propaganda, an education system, public education system that's not adequately funded. People don't realize, a lot of people don't even realize that we're involved in these wars. Right. It's because it's not in the news, really.
Yeah, I mean, I would wager most Americans don't know we're still in Afghanistan and have been there for 17 years. I doubt they even have a clue that there's boots on the ground. And, you know, you see the way the machine works. You know, Trump ran on a very anti-interventionist platform. And he said, you know, why are we going there and all this other stuff. And then the minute he gets in office, he's like, wow, we got to up the troop count in Afghanistan and all this stuff. Yeah. So it's really quite insane that this is where, and I want to make sure I'm going to hit this button real quick, that, you know, just how quickly people forget, you know. And I heard people, friends of mine who consider themselves, they're very smart people, who consider themselves very liberal, who are like, yeah, but we had to bomb Syria. People who don't like Trump at all, and we're like, well, we had to. You saw that footage of the gas attacks on the kids, and everyone's just so indoctrinated. At every turn, there's some new ad campaign for a new video game that's all war, military strike. And like you say, the sporting events, especially the NFL, is just like rockets. I mean, it's like watching Triumph of the Will. And they have ad after ad after ad, you know, recruiting people. They've got, you know, the Marine Corps has a new ad that came out in the last year or so that's really geared for young women. Show them go fight into battle. And that's, you know, equality and diversity now is... You know, and then as you talked about earlier, there's the conscription of poverty. You know, yes. People don't have jobs, they don't have opportunities. I met so many vets over there when I was doing comedy shows, you know, 06, 07, 08, and 2011, who said, oh, I re-upped because they gave me a $20,000 re-enlistment bonus. There's no jobs back where I live. I could make $9 an hour at Walmart, but...
So this is where maybe a Green New Deal would come in. Yeah. So that people don't feel like they need to resort to being complicit in mass murder in order just to get by. You know, I'm talking to a young guy recently who just told me that he plans to join the Army. And, you know, I explained a little bit about what we're discussing, the military-industrial complex, the wars are all phony, you know, being complicit in killing innocent people. And he kind of acknowledged it, but then the willingness was just still there. And I think maybe it's an out of sight, out of mind thing. Like those those people who are dying are far away.
Right.
And so too is our emotional, our empathy for those people.
You bring up a great point. When there's not if every night on MSNBC and Fox and CNN, every day we are seeing footage from what's happening in Yemen, or our rocket attacks, or what is happening to civilians, or we talked about the 22 vets a day that commit suicide from PTSD. If that was up in front of everybody in the corporate media, then maybe that young man might go, oh boy, I don't know. But it's just sort of, he understands it intellectually, but it's not in his face. He's not looking at it every day. That's what happened in Vietnam. That's the thing that the powers that be learned. You know, every day people would come home and watch their evening news, and they'd watch civilians dying in Vietnam. They'd watch soldiers dying in Vietnam. And so the whole country started going, what are we doing over there? So that was the last time we've seen war on TV like that.
Yeah, now what they do is they have this embedding program, which sounds like the military is getting the journalists to the front lines, but really they're bringing them to places where they're going to be allowed to see and record only what they want to be seen and recorded.
Right.
So I recommend people check out a book that's called Unembedded, which has the photojournalism of a team of journalists who were there in Iraq prior to the U.S. invasion in 2003. And it really brings out the humanity of the people who were there in a way that you're never going to see on American mainstream media.
Right. That, you know, just how quickly people forget, you know, and I heard people, friends of mine who are consider themselves, they're very smart people who consider themselves very liberal, who are like, yeah, but we had to bomb Syria. People who don't like Trump at all, and we're like, well, we had to. You saw that footage of the gas attacks on the kids, and everyone's just so indoctrinated. At every turn, there's some new ad campaign for a new video game that's all war, military strike. And like you say, the sporting events, especially the NFL, is just like rockets. I mean, it's like watching Triumph of the Will. And they have ad after ad after ad, you know, recruiting people. They've got, you know, the Marine Corps has a new ad that came out in the last year or so that's really geared for young women, show them go fight into battle. And that's, you know, equality and diversity now is, you know, and then as you talked about earlier, there's the conscription of poverty, you know, people don't have jobs. They don't have opportunities. I met so many vets over there when I was doing comedy shows, you know, 06, 07, 08, and 2011, who said, oh, I re-upped because they gave me a $20,000 re-enlistment bonus. There's no jobs back where I live. I could make $9 an hour at Walmart, but.
So this is where maybe a Green New Deal would come in. Yeah. So that people don't feel like they need to resort to being complicit in mass murder in order just to get by. You know, I'm talking to a young guy recently who just told me that he plans to join the Army. And, you know, I explained a little bit about what we're discussing, the military-industrial complex, the wars are all phony, you know, being complicit in killing innocent people. And he kind of acknowledged it, but then the willingness was just still there. And I think maybe it's an out of sight, out of mind thing. Like those people who are dying are far away. And
right.
So too is our emotional, you know, our empathy for those people.
You bring up a great point. When there's not if every night on MSNBC and Fox and CNN, every day we were seeing footage from what's happening in Yemen, or our rocket attacks, or what is happening to civilians, or we talked about the 22 vets a day that commit suicide from PTSD. If that was up in front of everybody in the corporate media, then maybe that young man might go, oh boy, I don't know. But it's just sort of, he understands it intellectually, but it's not in his face. He's not looking at it every day. That's what happened in Vietnam. That's the thing that the powers that be learned. You know, every day people would come home and watch their evening news, and they'd watch civilians dying in Vietnam. They'd watch soldiers dying in Vietnam. And so the whole country started going, what are we doing over there? So that was the last time we've seen war on TV like that.
Yeah, now what they do is they have this embedding program, which sounds like the military is getting the journalists to the front lines, but really they're bringing them to places where they're going to be allowed to see and record only what they want to be seen and recorded.
Right.
So I recommend people check out a book that's called Unembedded, which has the photojournalism of a team of journalists who were there in Iraq prior to the U.S. invasion in 2003. And it really brings out the humanity of the people who were there in a way that you're never going to see on American mainstream media.
Right.
Because I think to most Americans, Iraqis and Afghanis and Syrians and all these people, they're sort of like they're this entity that we consider to be other.
Right.
Other somehow than American, which I think it's no secret that there's a lot of racist sentiment in American culture. And the military for assuredly pushes racism into the heads of young recruits, because if you can consider, you know, the human instinct is not to kill other human beings.
Right.
So you really got to sort of purge that instinct from soldiers so that it'll be easier for them to be willing to go kill people.
Yeah.
So every war has sort of racial slurs and so forth that get floated around to refer to the opposition or the enemy. And it works. Because remember also that the average age of an American soldier is between 18 and 25.
Yep. And
the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in critical thinking, is not fully developed until maybe age 22, somewhere in your early 20s. So these are young, impressionable people who are growing up in this culture that's full of propaganda and indoctrination. You know, honor, patriotism, flag waving, you know. And it instills in people a willingness to participate in militarism that is really quite immoral on many, many levels. The fact that we send children, really, that's what they are. I mean, when I'm 33 now. When I think to myself as an 18-year-old, I had no business being involved in that kind of, you know, that's a grown-up's business, the business of being a soldier. So it's wrong on so many levels. And I believe and am hopeful that an education campaign will bring people around. I try to get everybody to check out a documentary called Sir, No Sir. It's on YouTube. And it's about the GI anti-war movement of the Vietnam era, because my public education consisted of, teaching me that it was hippies and college students,
right,
mainly, that were protesting the Vietnam War. I didn't really learn until watching this documentary that the real heart and soul of the anti-war movement was the military members themselves.
Yes.
It wouldn't have been successful without them, because that's how you bring a war machine to a grinding halt, is if there's no soldiers to fight. If you can't rely on people to carry out the orders, it becomes really difficult to carry out military operations.
Right.
So, and interestingly, when I meet Vietnam veterans around, I ask them if they participated in or even knew of the anti-war movement of that era, and many of them don't. So the history of anti-war sentiment in this country is just totally outweighed by the glorification
right.
of war in this country. And so if we don't, as a population, participate in any way we can think of educating our fellow citizens, especially the youth who are the ones who are going to join up, and especially the current active duty and reserve people who, like me as an 18-year-old young adult, didn't realize what I was involved in while I was in it. We need for the education campaign to better be matched up against the efforts of the establishment to prevent people from knowing this important information. And I think it's possible. Mm-hmm. We have the internet. I mean, in the 60s and 70s, they didn't even have cell phones and the internet. Right. It should be easier for us now than it was for them.
Well, yeah, and that's why they're trying to control the internet. But
yeah.
Well, Joseph, I really appreciate your time. And give everybody a website to go to for Veterans for Peace.
That'd be veteransforpeace.org. Will be the national website.
Okay.
And there's local chapters all around, and if there isn't one, you could always start one. But honestly, you don't have to be affiliated with Veterans for Peace in order to make a difference. There's a few important resources that I try to turn people on to, and any individual could share those resources by name with anybody who's willing. One of them is called War is a Racket, which was written by Major General Smedley Butler, a Marine Corps general of some 30 years. And I like to tell people about it, because that way you don't have to take it from me,
right?
Some guy. This is a Marine Corps general who's telling us that the wars are BS. And then it brings us forward to Dwight Eisenhower, who in his farewell address from the presidency used the term military-industrial complex and warned everybody about it. So, take it from these guys who knew better than anybody else what was going on inside the military, the trajectory that the military was taking vis-a-vis the industrial influence on it.
Yeah.
And of course, the last big one is the 2005 documentary called Why We Fight by Eugene Jarecki, which is about the military-industrial complex. And for me, I don't know how anybody could watch that film and not at least be in a place where they're going to think longer and harder about joining the military. So that's kind of where I'm at. If anybody who's willing to listen, I try to just tell them about those 3 resources. Also, Addicted to War, an illustrated expose by Joel Andreas, which is very approachable. It's kind of like a comic book format that gives the history of American militarism, specifically vis-a-vis the industrial complex.
Right. Well, thank you for all those resources, Joseph, and we appreciate it. And everybody out there watching, I always say there's so many ways for you to get involved and get informed, and you can go to veteransforpeace.org or watch any of those movies or read any of those books that we've talked about. Many of you already have, but especially if you know somebody that is young, 17, 18, thinking about joining the military, just open them, just say, okay, just look at all sides of it, you know. Here's what it is, you know, and talk to people that have served and read these books and watch these documentaries, because there's plenty of like, yay, war. There's plenty of that out there. And the recruiter is going to tell you whatever they got to tell you. So, you know, get all the sides, get all the different points of view on something before you jump into it. But Joseph John from Veterans for Peace, thank you so much for taking your time out of your day. And we appreciate you sharing your experience with us, and we appreciate everything you're doing with Veterans for Peace.
I appreciate the work that you do with your comedy, especially also, Graham, incorporating really important things for people to think about into your comedic work. And thanks for having me on the show. Thanks to Cam here at the Block off Biltmore. If you're in the Asheville area, please come down and support the Block.
It's a great venue. That's where we did our show in June for the Progressive Comedy Tour. Check it out. And folks, Ron Placone and I are going once a month starting in January to cities near you. We're starting in Florida in January. So all, you know, New Orleans we're going to, Pensacola, all different places. So go to grahamelwood.com for all those shows, and please support us at patreon.com/grahamelwood. Joseph, thank you so much for your time, and everybody out there, thanks for watching.
Thank you.